up, guys? Welcome back to Faith and Failures. Before we get started, I want to say thank you for those who have been giving. If you haven't yet, there's a donate button at the bottom. You can click that to help the show out. Also, faithandfailures.com is now live, and you can go and check out weekly and upcoming stuff as well as discounts on the store. So I have with me yet again, Caleb McCaslin.
It's good to be back.
So what you got for me today?
Today's topic is a scary one for many people, but we're gonna go real slow. It's called abortion. And I just want to quickly address one thing that both sides, the pro-life and pro-choice side, I would hope agree upon. And that's that the key, in my eyes, the key to solving the abortion issue is really just being soft-hearted, not allowing your pride to get in the way. It's being nice and respectful and civil and conversation. Try to engage in conversation instead. Personally, I don't think it matters if you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're black, white, tall, short, young, poor, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. What matters is, can you be soft-hearted and can we work together as a team searching for the truth together?
That's where real change happens.
Yeah, exactly. I'm striving for here. I want to make real progress with this issue. I jump right in.
Let's do it.
So before we get started, I want to define abortion for you guys because a lot of people will get confused. They'll have different termination of a pregnancy after accompanied by followed by the death of the embryo or fetus. Not just audio-wise, but also visually. If you are interested in learning about abortion visually, you can actually go to Abortion No. It's the Center for Bioethical Reform, and they actually do show real-life abortions there.
Really?
So, yes.
That would be terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. So, discretion advised, but if you want to take a look at that.
Now, did they do that for the purpose of people say they're performing them? What was the reason for... Is it somebody else who's posting other people's work? You know what I mean? Like, they're not doing the abortions, but they're displaying it for everybody else? Or are they the one putting it on?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they get their hands on the videos, but it's a pro-life organization, so I don't think they're... I don't know how it works. There's a lot of undercover stuff, though. We're going to get to that later with live action and other people who go...
Really?
Yeah, but...
Stuff is...
So one of the disagreements with abortion... there's really two key disagreements, and that's number one, when life begins, and the second one is what is the unborn? And that's probably the most important question. You can get lost in the arguments, you can get lost in, your emotions and debating and all these things, but really what matters is answering that question, what is the unborn? And also a secondary question to really understand is when does life begin? Because those, to me, whenever you boil down the abortion debate down into its core, that's really where the two key issues are, people disagree at those 2 points. Mm-hmm. When does life begin, and what is the unborn? So I actually brought with me today 6 different sources from Catholic Answers. The first 4 I have here are actually from medical textbooks, and the second 2 are from 2 different authors. Both are professors, and one is a professional philosopher, Peter Singer. Many people, I'm sure, have heard of him. They're actually both pro-choice, and yet I have quotes from them who both show that they actually believe life begins at fertilization in alignment with the original 4 sources I have here. So the first is the standard medical text titled Human Embryology and Teratology. It says, and quote, although human life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because under ordinary circumstances, a new genetically distinct human organism is thereby formed. Okay, that's from the Human Embryology and Teratology medical textbook. You have Keith Moore and TV and Persaud's textbook, The Developing Human, which, quote, human life begins at fertilization, end quote. I mean, that's pretty dry. Yeah, pretty cut and dry for you. And then the third one, this is from Langman's Medical Embryology, quote, development begins with fertilization, end quote. The fourth one, Scott Gilbert's chapter 4 of Scott Gilbert's book titled Developmental Biology, the title of his 4th chapter is actually called, quote, fertilization, beginning of a new organism, end quote. So those are the first 4 sources. So people want to say, oh, where'd you hear that from? What are your sources? Are they credible? Look, here we have 4 credible medical textbooks, all in agreement that life begins at fertilization.
And also, on any reference that he mentions today during this podcast, there will be links below to where you can directly go listen to the Audible book, or you can buy the book off of Amazon. There will be links to where you can yourself read and research what he's talking about today. So just to let you know, they'll be below.
The 5th source I have here is from Professor David Boonin. He's the author of the book titled A Defense of Abortion. Think about that for a second. This is what he writes in the book, quote, the most straightforward relation between you and me on the one hand and every human fetus on the other is this. All are living members of the same species, Homo sapiens. A human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage, end quote. Think about that for a second. This is from a man who considers himself pro-choice. He even wrote
this is the guy that's pro-choice?
Yeah, this is a pro-choice advocate. He wrote the book. The title of the book is A Defense of Abortion. And yet here he is quoting from his, and I'm quoting from his own book, that he believes that that life begins at fertilization.
I guess you would call it the circle of life. If you think about the things that are going on during fertilization, there's no dead parts that then later becomes life. Everything is moving and living that joins together and then becomes something else. There's no end and then start. It's all one like fluid motion, if that makes sense, of all like life being joined together and then merged and grown into something.
That's when the sperm and the egg meet, and whenever they do that, that creates that zygote. And at that point forward, that's whenever, from that moment, if that moment doesn't occur, you're not going to have a fully formed baby in 9 months. You can have everything leading up to that point, but without that moment, the process has not yet begun, and so you have to have it. It's critical. This is the last source I have here, and this is from another professor from Princeton University. He's a professional philosopher. His name is Peter Singer, and this is from his book Practical Ethics. He says, quote, "There is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is a human being," end quote.
Dry again.
Yeah. So look, I'm bringing the facts here today. Right from the start, I want to make sure that it's very clear that of where life begins, so there's no confusion. We have everything cut, dry, and clear, easy to follow. So here's a advocates. Now that we've covered that, the question that they have to answer is the firstly. Why is it not a human being at first if it comes from a human mother and a human father, the human species? Why is it? And what causes it to later become a human being? So not only do you have to answer the question of what is it originally, but later you have to answer the question of what causes it? What happens to the SLED acronym? And this is a very useful acronym. If you consider yourself pro-life, this is a must. You've got to memorize this. This is the SLED acronym. If you haven't heard of it already, it is the 4 differences between the unborn and born human beings. A zygote, okay? There's only 4 differences between that zygote and a 55-year-old man. And those 4 differences are size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And choice arguments are going to derive themselves from one of these 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the SLED acronym and show you guys real fast how you can use this effectively. And remember, whenever you're in conversation with pro-choicers, you don't want to be emotional. You don't want to be angry. You don't want to get...
Because that will escalate quick.
Yeah, and you're not going to make any progress whatsoever. You've got to be kind and civil and respectful in everything you do. You can have a conversation. You don't have to engage in it. The other thing I would mention is guys, you have to remember you don't have to change their mind right there on the spot. People get in the mindset of thinking, oh well, we have to change their mind. If I engage in this conversation, people in evangelism do that too. They want to change their mind.
I want to see the effects right now.
Yeah, and I love the way Greg Kokel puts it. He says you want to put a pebble in their shoe. That's your goal. Is you just want to get them to think about it. You just want to get them to question their own belief.
Because nobody's going to change their mind for real until they come to the conclusion in their own head.
Exactly. They have to do it on their own. You don't want to try to pull a 180 right then and there. So pebble in the shoe and move along. That's your job. So anyways, getting back to the SLED acronym, this stands for size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. So size. Often you'll hear pro-choice advocates say something like, well, it's really, you think that's a human being? It's so small. Like, is that really a human being? Well, what you can do is you can show this how this doesn't work by comparing it to people. So a 2-year-old is year-old, but we're not going to say that is any less human simply because he or she is smaller than the 25-year-old.
Right.
So size is not what determines human value in life. It stands for level of development. You say, well, it's less developed than we are. Well, again, a 2-year-old is less developed than a 25-year-old, but is the 2-year-old no longer a human being simply because they're less developed? I don't think so. The E is for environment. Strangely enough, many politicians will take this stance. Up to 9 months, they think the environment is what determines whether you're a human being or not. But environment, that's location, where you are does not determine who you are. If you're a man up on the moon, that's a very bizarre and different environment. If you're diving beneath the surface of the ocean, that's a very bizarre and different environment. But where you are does not determine who you are. Just because they're in a bizarre, different environment doesn't mean they're no longer a human being.
Right.
So that baby is in the exact natural place it should be. That saying where you are is a good, that arguing from environment is a good argument for the pro-choice side.
Like if you find a beautiful flower growing in the desert where it doesn't belong, you don't go chop it down and destroy it because, hey, man, you don't belong here.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's still
yeah.
And then the D finally is degree of dependency. This is a very common one. You say, well, it's dependent upon the mother for survival, therefore it's not a human being. But just because someone is dependent doesn't mean they're no longer a human being. Other was...
Tell that to euthanasia.
Yeah, for real. My great-grandmother was dependent upon an oxygen machine her last weeks before she passed away, and are we going to say that she's no longer a human being simply because she was dependent upon the oxygen machine?
Right.
I mean, if dependency is really what determines we're not human beings until we're 4, 5, 6 years old, because even newborns, I mean, we're dependent when you're a newborn, you're dependent on your clothing, your food, your shelter. Everything is dependent upon your parents after birth. So to say that, well, that they don't really count because they're dependent upon the mother for survival, not a good argument, because so are newborns. So are 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. They're dependent.
If someone has a job and becomes crippled for life and have to be dependent on their spouse, or is military and has to be dependent, it's the same situation.
It doesn't
you need
lessen-
somebody
yeah.
else. It doesn't make you any less of a human.
Yes, exactly. That's the point. It doesn't make you any value. Okay, so now we move to that. We're going to move to some of the common pro-choice arguments. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of it. It's probably the most common one. My body, my choice. 8 different arguments or slogans that you've probably heard in the media, and I'm going to debunk them real fast for you so you guys can understand.
And before he does this, if you're listening right now and you are pro-choice, or you have a circumstance that you justify, don't turn it off now. Just listen to the end. We're not trying to attack you with this podcast. We're not trying to brainwash you to think how we think. We're bringing some valuable information, and you as a person who may one day make this choice yourself or can pass this podcast to someone else, just trying to shine a light. All we're trying to do is speak for life, not against it. So do not think that this podcast is against you and that we're not for you. We don't know you. We don't know your circumstance. We're just trying to bring some extra information that maybe you is stuck in which decision they need to make. So just listen to this and don't be angry, even if it does. Listen to the end. Okay, we're going to wrap it up in a pretty little bow and make it real. So just keep on listening.
Yeah. And I would add to that I'm always open to hearing what pro-choicers have to say.
What you think about it, use hashtag faith and failures, and we can respond to you in that way. So use that. We'll find you.
Yeah, and I'm a very passionate guy. Please don't mistake my passion for anything other than what it is, because I fully respect any person regardless of their position. But I do want to.
This is our take on it. We both believe this way. This is how we see it. So we're going to be passionate about it. We're going to come at it from this. We're going to come at it from this standpoint and this belief. So just listen. He's obviously listened to the other side, or he wouldn't have all these debunks.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously,
countless hours.
Yeah, you have to study it up to be, and so this is just a part of your studying to help somebody else or to help yourself one day.
My body, my choice. Now, this on the surface may sound logical. It may sound like it's good. And the first thing I want to point out is I actually agree with that we should be respecting women and their bodies. But the question here is, shouldn't we also respect the bodies of the babies? You see, whenever you say my body, my choice, this assumes that there's only one body present, but that's a scientifically inaccurate statement because there's actually 2 bodies present rather than one. So let me give you a few examples here. If you were to go out and you were to get a piercing on the ear or belly button or wherever you would like, that would be an example of your body, your choice. Or if you were to go get a tattoo on your arm or your leg or wherever, that would be another example of your body, your choice. But whenever it comes to a body, there's actually 2 bodies present rather than one. So to say my body, my choice doesn't make sense logically. So that's why that first one just doesn't work. The second one here is can't afford the baby. Again, right now, I sympathize with women who struggle to take care of their kid, and I'll be the first one to tell you that I will help you out financially, emotionally, any way that I can help you out. If I know that there's a young woman who's struggling, considering an abortion, for whatever I'm aware of, we'll jump to your aid and help you. That's our heart. That's our goal, is to constantly to help you, regardless of your position. But that being said, can't afford the baby. So
nobody can.
Yeah, for real.
I mean, that's one of my wife's arguments of not having kids yet, is because we can't afford childcare. We can't afford this. We can't afford that. And if you ask anyone who has ever had kids and raised them, they will tell you no one can.
Yeah, you find a way.
You find a way. You
Yeah.
adjust, your budget. You adjust your home. You adjust. She told me the other day, she's like, if we had a baby, your office would be gone. I said, no, it wouldn't. I said, I spend 90% of my work time in there.
Yeah.
I said, there's enough room in our closet for a baby, right? I'm just kidding. But like your thing that she worries about is being able to afford childcare, being able to afford all the stuff that comes with it, especially right now you can't even find toilet paper. And you're supposed to be able to find, stuff for a baby. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And so I get it. But what I found out, because when I was growing up, my parents did not have money. Okay? They had a house that they always lived in that was provided by the church. They never owned one themselves. And then my mom had to work 1 or 2 jobs. My dad was a pastor. He'd work another job. Whatever it took to get by just to eat. There is always a way. There's always help somewhere, whether it be government or family or whatever, that can help you to get where you're not feeling like you're constantly spinning your wheels. There are many, many, many ways you can get help. You just got to fill out the paperwork. That's the one thing. Like it's like one of those mountains that you're like, that's a whole lot of paper.
Yeah.
But I mean, if they have a process so that not just people come with their hands out. Another way, if you can't afford it, you can put that baby up for adoption. That is a big option. There are people out there, up until maybe about a year ago, my in-laws, my wife's sister, they had been trying to have a baby for like 6 years, and they couldn't. There's people out there that cannot have, but God did a miracle, and now they've had their first child, and they're not sure if they're going to have a second. But like there are multiple people out there that cannot have kids on their own. They physically cannot do it, and they would be happy to accept that blessing from you. Just please think of that as an option.
And that would be a huge blessing. There's many people out would be happy to take that kid in. So getting back to the statement that you can't afford the baby, getting more to the logical side, is that if you're struggling, you can walk into a church, you can knock door to door, you can get connected to a pro-life organization. They'll be more than willing to help you out. There's many options out there and many ways to go. The answer is not for, you don't want to walk into a building. Their job is to have you pay them so that they can take your child out of this world. That's just not the best option.
And the biggest hurdle in this whole process is pride.
That is a big problem.
It's hard to say, I can't do this. I can't provide. Just personally, like it would be really hard if I was like, hey, you got some money I could borrow?
Yeah.
Or, hey, church, do you have some food? But churches are, one reason God put them on this earth is to help. It's like that's what Jesus said to do. That's the church's job.
And that gets back to what I was saying at the beginning, that you have to have a soft heart from the beginning. When it comes to this issue and many issues that are the big issues in life, you have to have a soft heart. Mm-hmm. You've got to be willing to come into the room and be the most humble, kind, patient person that you possibly can be in that moment, because otherwise it's just going to lead to destruction that's unnecessary. We hear quite often is, well, you're a man, so you don't have a voice, or you're a man, so you don't have an opinion on this issue. So there's my question is, when did the validity of an argument become dependent upon whether I'm male or female? You see, arguments are gender neutral. Logic is gender neutral. So it doesn't matter if someone is male or female. The argument is either good or bad either way. The second point I would bring to this is that if only women have a voice, then who are the little men in the womb? Or what about the little women in the womb? Does their voice count as well, or do only certain women's voice count? These are questions you need to consider if you're backing this kind of statement. And lastly, I would mention this, is that voice, then I would question, what about the 9 male Supreme Court justices who actually decide? If men's voice no longer counts, then how are we going to count the ruling that abortion is now legal that was made back then? Here's a fourth one you hear quite often, but the baby will live a life and is going to be poor. From the get-go, I agree. Being poor is a bad thing. If you're pro-life or pro-choice, we don't want anybody to be poor, right? Nobody wants that. But this argument ultimately is going to fail in 2 areas. The first is that it's confirming suffering now and it's assuming suffering long term. So the foundation of that argument is saying, well, look, it's going to live a terrible life. It's going to be bad. So we might as well, that justifies us in having the abortion now. But
might as well end it now.
Yeah, but see, it doesn't make logical sense, because even though it's true you avoided, you're confirming that loss now.
Something you've never even seen before. There are so many stories of people who were from the ghetto, from poor lifestyles, that made something out of themselves because they were determined
absolutely
that they were going to be different than where they came from.
Exactly.
That's how we better our lives, is to look from where we came from and try to make it better for the next generation. Not saying, oh, it's going to suck no matter what.
Yeah, you don't ever want to assume, oh, well, it's bad. Well, we don't know that. Who's to say those individuals couldn't overcome their obstacles and become something better than what they were born into? You can't determine your circumstances, but you can determine the outcome often in life.
Absolutely.
Here's the fifth one. This is a very, very common one. It's her right to choose. So here I'm actually going to have a lot of agreement at the beginning of this one. If you've noticed, this is what I do. And every time you hear an objection, this is a good habit to get into. If you can, find common ground immediately. That's the first thing you want to do whenever someone has an for you, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, and they have an objection. The first thing, again, seeking that civility, that respect. So actually, that they have a right to choose. I agree women have a right to choose. They can choose what car they drive. They can choose they can choose what job they have. They can choose who they marry. They can choose many things. But the question is, can they choose whether or not an innocent baby lives or dies? That one, I don't think any would have a choice to do so.
Yeah.
Here's a big one. This is
the one I hear the most.
This is the one that is yes. This one is, what about rape? Okay, people are very quick to jump on this. And again, right from the get-go, we're going to have here. Both sides can agree the pro-lifers and the pro-choice is evil and should be severely punished for his crime. Not all of them, but most pro-lifers and pro-choicers do agree on that point. They may disagree on whether or not he deserves the death penalty. Some people say he should. Some people say he shouldn't. That's a different topic entirely. Generally, people will agree that rapist does deserve to be punished for his crime. The second point here is that you have to understand rape is under 1% of all abortions that occur. And you're going to hear that statistic quite often, but I don't hear people cite the sources of where they got that from. And so what I'm going to give you here is a source and it says, according to a study from the Guttmacher Institute in 1987, both of those studies collected data saying under 1% of those women had an abortion because of rape. That's from the Guttmacher Institute in 1987, and again, they did that study in 2004. The third point here is, and this is just in the form of a question. This is a question I'll ask students on campus when I'm interviewing them. And that is, why should we punish the son or daughter for the crimes of the father? I'll say that again. Why should we punish the son or daughter for the crimes of the father? You often hear people, they say, well, we're not going to be able to solve the first tragedy with the second tragedy.
Yeah.
That to me is an excellent point that I have yet to hear a good response to.
It's because there's not one.
This is the fourth point, and this is actually got this from a pastor in Arizona. His name's Pastor Jeff. You can look him up. He's a great source for learning about abortion and other things. But he actually will ask people, and typically, and I've done this myself, and I'll be on campus, and I'll say, what's wrong with rape? And students, their eyes get as big as the moon. They're breathing, and they're huffing, they're puffing, and they're like, who is this guy? Like, they're like, what do you mean what's wrong with rape? What's wrong with rape? And they give me a definition that roughly goes about like this. They say it's a terrible, terrible act against another human being without their permission. Those are typically the three things that they're going to point out. Now, what do you notice about that definition?
It's the same with abortion.
It's the same as abortion. The question for society is, why is it that as a society, when we use that definition for rape, we recognize quite easily the great evil of rape, yet when we use the exact same definition, we fail to recognize the evil of abortion?
Yeah.
We need to think about these things.
That's a good explanation.
The seventh argument here, this is actually a slogan, I think it was from the Clintons in the 90s, is that you need to keep abortion safe, legal, and...
It should have stayed in the 90s. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, safe for who? Not the baby. Legality does not equate to morality. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's okay. Slavery was legal, doesn't mean it was okay morally. And rare, my question is, why should it be rare if it's not, because many people on the pro-choice side believe it's not a baby, it's not a human being. That's their argument. But if that's the case, and it's simply as simple as removing your tonsils, then why should it be rare? It makes more sense to say it should be rare if it's a human being or if you know there's value there. Mm-hmm. That's my response to the safe, legal, and rare. This one I've heard quite often from politicians. Number 8 is everyone deserves the life they want. This is the politicians trying. The irony in that statement. I've seen time and time again politicians make that statement, but they completely assume and neglect the fact that the baby doesn't get freedom. Yeah. The baby, there is no quality for that baby. So if that's a justification for abortion, that you would have to assume that the unborn is not human in order to make that work.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we've run through those arguments. I just want to make a quick point. It's good to know these arguments, guys, but the primary focus should be on the question, what is the unborn? And we have to remember to keep a soft heart. I'm going to keep repeating that. That's a common theme. I'm going to keep hitting up. We have to be soft-hearted and humble as we possibly can, because without that, we're not going to make any progress.
Right.
I got some excellent sources I brought here today for you guys to learn about abortion. You can actually go to YouTube and find Dr. Mike Adams versus Dr. Parker. There's a debate on YouTube, as well as Nadine versus Klusendorf, the debate. Catholic Answers is a great resource. As Stephen said, we'll have these down below for you to find the link to. Live Action with Lila Rose, Dr. Anthony Levatino, who has an amazing story, by the way, if you haven't heard. Performed abortions himself, before he actually became pro-life. So his story is an amazing one, his testimony. And now today he's actually a proud supporter and advocate for the pro-life position. And he's out there trying to save as many kids as he can.
What was the change? Like, if he had done it so much?
If I'd have to, I'm trying to remember, but he was performing many abortions. He was trying to have a child with his wife, and for years they were trying to have a kid. They couldn't have a kid, so eventually they decided they were going to adopt a kid. And once they kind of finalized that adoption, well, a month later, and so yeah,
surprise.
It's crazy. Yeah, and he tells the story. I'll butcher it, but he tells the story amazingly on YouTube. And he comes home from work one day, he comes home from work and he's having, I want to say he was just having dinner with some friends, some neighbors or something. And then they hear screeching outside, and they go outside in the yard to find that their child had been hit by a car. And so they call the ambulance, and they're doing everything they can. And he talks about, in his testimony, the feeling and the overwhelming feeling that he has when he's holding the moment that he began to change his mind on abortion. He began to make the shift to become pro-life. So it's an amazing testimony. If you guys haven't heard of it, absolutely go check it out. It's awesome. But his name is Dr. Anthony Levatino. I want you guys to know that this is a lot of, I have pro-choice and pro-choice people, have conversations with them, same the other way around. And you just have to remember that we're all seeking the truth together. I don't see this as, somebody else is my opponent. I don't see this as they're the enemy. I see this as we're all one team seeking the truth together. We may disagree on what the truth is. We may disagree on the inner workings of things, but the bigger goal, we should unify in that way, that we need to figure out, we need to get to the bottom of this. What is the unborn? When does life begin? These are questions that the truth can uncover for us, and we need to seek that. Regardless of your political stance, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of where you came from, this is something we can all work together as a team. Doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, we can come together and work on that. And so that's one message I really want to drive home. The other thing is that I've had enough with the arguments. People get caught up in those. Enough with the name calling, the emotional shouting matches. This is very common. I've had enough with the lies and the trickery, and especially enough with the politicians and the powerful and the prideful putting their own selfish agenda above that of the innocent. I'm sick and tired of watching the average person shy away and cower down from the room as soon as abortion is brought up in the conversation. 1 Peter 3:15, it says, "Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you." As Christians, we can't be scared. We don't get brownie points for being stupid. Right. Okay, we've got to engage in the culture and consistently be ready to give that answer for the hope that is within us.
That's the only way we could change it.
Exactly. We can't be shying away and cowering down from that. And you often hear people say, well, that's nasty. I don't want to talk about it, Or they'll say something like, that's gross, and I don't want to see any of that. Well, my question is, if it's so nasty and it's so gross and it's so disturbing that you don't want it in your life for more than 3 seconds, maybe you should do something about it instead of simply avoiding it. In 1940, I'm sure many people had heard of the Holocaust. They probably saw the emaciated bodies, they saw the living conditions, they were aware of the starvation, they knew about the evils being done, they knew about the gas chambers and the murdering of children. And if their response back then was, gross, I don't want to dwell on that, can we change the subject? Would you be okay with that? Is that our...
Yeah, it's very difficult as a Christian because it's like we have to walk on eggshells or we're going to offend somebody all the time. It's like you can't have a real conversation with anybody because they don't want answers, they want arguments.
Yeah.
And so this is a huge argument with people because there are people who say now, if you believe this way, I'm not trying to call you out. It doesn't make sense to me personally. from my belief standpoint. So if I say that I'm a Christian, but I'm pro-choice, to me that's a conflict. That just to me it doesn't add up. Like how God would not, that doesn't make sense to me. But I'm sure everybody has a reason for their beliefs. If you don't, you need to find your reason for your beliefs.
Yeah,
it's stupid to follow. Don't follow blindly into the dark.
Yeah, no matter what it is.
Do your own research. Look things up. Like you say here, these little babies can't speak for themselves. We got to do the talking.
Yeah, they can't.
We have to.
Somebody has to.
Somebody has to.
The next point I have is specifically regarding my generation, the younger generation. I've noticed, I can't prove this. I don't have any statistics for this one, but I've noticed just from observation that it seems to me like we're worse, morally speaking, than the older generation. We devour Netflix pretty much with whoever's willing. We pleasure ourselves in the moment and in what feels good, and we don't have an ounce of gratitude or understanding of what it takes to achieve and maintain that freedom that we are constantly exercising. So, I mean, young people, we don't know our history, much less do we respect it. So I think it's time for young people to wake up. It's time for us to exercise a little bit of courage. The freedoms from the youngest among us. So more than freedom, their life is being stolen from them, their entire life. So it's time for us to speak up to those who can't speak for those who can't speak for themselves. It's time we speak the truth even when it hurts. Because I would rather speak to save the innocent than be silent and allow death to continue in my own country. I would rather speak truth to society and allow them to hate me than to speak lies to a society just so they can accept me. We got to be patient. We got to be kind. We got to be respectful. And above all, we have to have courage.
Get the truth out of love and it be received better.
So you've got to approach it in a loving way.
A few years ago, in my personal experience, they have what's called a morning after pill. I don't know if that still exists.
Yeah, it's Plan B.
Is that what you call it?
That's what it's called, Plan B.
Well, so if you don't use protection or whatever, you just have a wild night and to take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
And so that morning after pill or whatever, that reminded me of that because, like, if you didn't take the proper precautions, if you're going to live like an idiot, then, there's something else. That's how I used to live my life. Like, I would mess up all the time and then wait for either my mommy to come and rescue me, or I would always end up finding a way out and never have to face that I was the problem and that I was the one messing up. I think that the younger ones getting abortions, I think not all, but some are like, well, it's just another way for me to fix a mess up.
Yeah.
And then some people feel like they really have to.
Yeah.
And just to wrap it up, you have a choice. For one, you have a responsibility to that baby, that unborn child, to protect it as if you've known it already. Which it's easy to do something like that when you don't have to face it. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just kind of, no, I'm not going to look. There are tons of resources. I'll be listing them, like I said, in the show notes. And you, to find another way besides abortion. And if you are listening to this and you have had even years after of what the effects are echoing in your life and in your family's life that you never saw before you went into get the abortion. If you have a story, I would love to have you on the podcast. You can use hashtag Faith and Failures to contact me at faithandfailures@gmail.com. Also, you can write me at faithandfailures.com. But I want to hear your stories. How, in this instance, abortion has affected you. Or maybe you're right now teeter-tottering back and forth, and you don't know whether you should, you don't know whether you shouldn't. Your friends are telling you, go ahead. Your parents are telling you, no, keep it, or the opposite. You always have a choice. There's always a left and there's always a right. You always have a choice. But the choice is yours at the end of the day. And so just coming from a personal standpoint, please, please, please choose to let that baby live. Whether you have to give it for adoption choose life. Whatever option you can find to help that baby live, please choose that. That's I'm not trying to beg you, but I am, because that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Like, my son is a blessing to me. Sometimes I want to punch him in the face, but I mean, that's just being a parent.
Remember that the key principles, the underlying principles when discussing this topic is, keep it respectful, keep it calm, express as much kindness as you can, and be soft where you came from, what your friends believe. What matters is be soft-hearted and seek the truth together as a team. We need to work together to find common ground, and we need to remove the animosity and stay logical. Stay logical. I love logic.
Keep your emotions out of it. You'll end up screaming and hitting.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in today. Thank you, Caleb, for coming on the show again.
It was awesome. I was happy to be here.
Appreciate you coming. A wealth of knowledge this guy has about everything he talks about. So you can check us out at faithandfailures.com. You can join the Facebook group. Also, if you want to interact with the podcast, use hashtag faithandfailures to ask questions. If you want to be a guest on the show, let me know, and we'll see you next week.